Hook. The cowboy stepped into the crowded church, took one look at the pregnant woman everyone was avoiding, and said something that made the entire room go silent. A baby cried as thunder shook the cabin walls. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like stones. Hannah gripped a worn blanket, her breath catching, while Wyatt burst through the door drenched from the storm. Mud dripped from his boots. In one trembling hand, she held a bundle of old account books that someone clearly never wanted found. Then Wyatt saw what was lying beside her, and froze. "Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from today." The church bell rang across Silver Butte, just as the last of the Sunday wagons rolled into town. Dust drifted along Main Street. Horses stood tied to hitching posts outside the general store. A dry Wyoming wind swept down from the foothills and rattled the cottonwoods behind the church. Hannah Price paused at the bottom of the wooden steps. Her hand rested lightly against the curve beneath her coat. 7 months. She drew a slow breath and climbed. The moment she entered, conversations faded. Not all at once. One voice stopped, then another, until only the creak of pews remained. Hannah kept walking. She had learned long ago that looking down only encouraged people to stare longer. A woman near the front leaned toward her friend. The whisper carried farther than she intended. "She's with child." Another woman gently pulled her daughter closer. Hannah felt it. Every glance, every silence, every judgment. She continued toward the back pew. The worn floorboards groaned beneath her boots. Pastor Whitaker stood beside the pulpit, with his Bible still closed. His eyes moved from Hannah to the congregation and back again. He cleared his throat. The room waited. "Hannah," he said carefully, "perhaps today isn't the best day." A few heads nodded. Someone muttered agreement. The pastor shifted uncomfortably. "There are young girls here. Some families are concerned." The words landed harder because they were spoken softly. Hannah stared at him. For a moment she thought she might answer. Instead, she simply nodded. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her worn leather bag. "Of course," she said quietly. No one stopped her. No one objected. She turned and began walking back down the center aisle. The stained glass windows threw colored light across the floor. Red, blue, gold. She watched those colors move beneath her feet and focused on them because it was easier than looking at faces. Halfway to the door, a chair scraped sharply against the floor. The sound cut through the church. Everyone looked. Wyatt Cole stood, tall, broad-shouldered, still wearing dust from the morning ride. His hat rested in his hands. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked directly at the pastor. "If she leaves," Wyatt said, "I leave too." The church went silent. Pastor Whitaker blinked. "Wyatt?" "No." His voice remained calm. Not loud, not angry. The kind of voice people listened to because it rarely spoke. He turned toward Hannah. She had never spoken more than a handful of words to him before. Not once had he given her reason to expect this. Yet there he stood, facing an entire town. "If the child needs protection," Wyatt said, "my ranch will provide it." A gasp moved through the room. Someone dropped a hymn book. Hannah stared at him. She could not understand what she was hearing. Wyatt met her eyes only briefly. There was no pity there, no performance, no attempt to look noble. Only certainty. A banker seated near the aisle frowned deeply. Vernon Pike. His fingers tightened around the silver head of his cane. "Careful, Cole," he said. "People will get the wrong impression." Wyatt looked at him. "People already have." No one spoke after that. The wind rattled the church windows. Far away, a horse whinnied outside. Hannah swallowed hard. For the first time in months, the weight pressing against her chest eased by the smallest amount. Not gone, just lighter. When the service ended, People filed out in uneasy silence. Wyatt waited near the church steps. Neither rushed to speak. Finally, he said, "You need a place to stay." Hannah looked across the town. There was nowhere else. "No questions?" she asked. Wyatt shook his head. "Not unless you want to answer them." The wind lifted a loose strand of her hair. Something in her expression softened. "Then I'll come," she said. Together they stepped off the church porch. Across the street, Vernon Pike stood beside the bank. The polished windows reflected the afternoon sun. He watched them without moving, without smiling, without blinking. And as Hannah followed Wyatt toward the wagon waiting beside the hitching rail, Vernon Pike tapped his cane once against the boardwalk and kept watching them go. The ride to Cedar Run Ranch took nearly an hour. The road wound north of Silver Butte through rolling grasslands that shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Fence lines stretched toward distant red hills. A few cattle grazed near shallow draws where spring water still lingered. Wyatt drove in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, just the kind carried by a man who spoke only when he had something worth saying. Hannah sat beside him with her bag resting on her lap. She expected questions. Who was the father? Why wasn't she married? Where would she go after the baby came? The questions never arrived. The wagon wheels rolled steadily through the dust. As the ranch appeared beyond a stand of cottonwoods, Hannah noticed the weathered entrance gate. Cedar Run Ranch. The words had faded from years of Wyoming wind. A ranch hand repairing a fence looked up as they approached. Ben Turner. He removed his hat when he saw Hannah. Nothing more. No curious stare. No whispered judgment. Just simple respect. The ranch house sat on a gentle rise overlooking the valley. 2 stories. White paint worn thin by years of sun and snow. A windmill turned lazily near the well. Wyatt climbed down first. "You'll want to see your room." That was all he said. Inside, the house felt strangely quiet. Not neglected. Just unfinished somehow. A coffee cup sat beside the stove. A coat hung neatly by the door. A ledger remained open on the dining table with a pencil laid across its pages. The signs of a man living alone. Wyatt led her upstairs. At the end of the hall, he opened a door. The room was small but clean. A wooden bed, a washstand, a rocking chair beside a window overlooking the pasture. Fresh linens. Someone had prepared it recently. Hannah looked around slowly. "You knew I was coming?" Wyatt rested one hand against the doorframe. "No." She glanced at him. "Then why is everything ready?" For a moment he looked out the window toward the hills. "My wife used to keep this room ready for visitors." The answer arrived quietly. No explanation followed. No invitation for sympathy. Hannah simply nodded. "I appreciate it." Wyatt gave a short nod of his own and stepped back. "Supper's at 6, then he left. The room fell still. Outside, a horse snorted in the yard. Somewhere below, a screen door creaked open and shut. For the first time in many months, Hannah unpacked her belongings without wondering where she would sleep tomorrow. The following morning, she woke before sunrise. Old habits. The ranch house remained dark. She found the kitchen exactly as she remembered. Orderly, functional, and desperately in need of someone who actually used it. A cast-iron skillet sat where it had been washed and left to dry. The flour bin stood nearly empty. 3 different coffee tins occupied the same shelf. Hannah smiled despite herself. Within an hour, biscuits baked in the oven. Coffee steamed from the pot. Bacon crackled softly in the skillet. The smell drifted through the house. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Wyatt appeared in the doorway. He stopped. Actually stopped. His eyes moved from the stove to the table, then to Hannah. "I hope you don't mind," she said. For several seconds he didn't answer. The scent of fresh biscuits filled the room. Finally he said, "I don't mind." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth before disappearing. That afternoon, Hannah discovered a neglected patch of soil behind the house, the remains of an old vegetable garden. She rolled up her sleeves and began clearing weeds. The next day, she found spare seeds in a storage shed. The day after that, she repaired loose curtains in the kitchen. Little things, quiet things. The ranch slowly began to feel lived in again. A week passed, then another. One evening, Wyatt returned from town carrying a stack of receipts and bank notices. He dropped them on the dining table. I can't make sense of half of it. Hannah sat down beside the lamp. The papers smelled faintly of dust and ink. She began sorting them. Loan notices, feed invoices, equipment payments, interest statements. Halfway through the stack, she paused. Her eyes narrowed. Something wrong? Wyatt looked up from his coffee. Hannah tapped one document, then another, then a third. These figures don't match. Wyatt pulled his chair closer. The amounts are different. No. She pointed to the signatures, the dates. He leaned forward. Hannah turned the receipts toward the light. These were filed months apart. She tapped the page again, but the interest was calculated as if they were filed together. Silence settled between them. The only sound came from the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, Wyatt said, "Who holds the note?" Hannah searched the final page. The answer sat at the bottom beneath a stamped signature. Her stomach tightened. Outside, the wind rattled the porch railing. Inside, the lamp flickered. Hannah looked up. Vernon Pike. The room grew very still. Wyatt looked down at the papers spread across the table. The lamp cast a yellow circle across the receipts and loan notices. Outside, the wind pushed softly against the kitchen windows. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Wyatt folded the papers into a neat stack. I've done business with him for years. Hannah watched him carefully. Then maybe that's why he got away with it. Something flickered across Wyatt's face. Not anger. Disappointment. The kind that settles deeper. The next morning began like most mornings at Cedar Run. Coffee on the stove, cold air drifting through the screen door, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. But by noon, the peace was gone. The news arrived on horseback. A rider from town pulled up hard at the front gate. Ben Turner stepped out of the barn. The man barely dismounted before speaking. He's back. Wyatt looked up from repairing a broken harness strap. Who? The rider hesitated. Curtis Hale. The name meant nothing to Wyatt, but not to Hannah. The basket she was carrying slipped from her hands. Potatoes rolled across the dirt yard. Nobody moved. The rider glanced awkwardly between them. He came into Silver Butte this morning. Then he climbed back onto his horse and rode away. Silence settled over the ranch. Hannah bent slowly to collect the potatoes. 1, 2, 3. Her fingers trembled only once. Wyatt noticed. He said nothing. That evening she sat alone on the porch. The sunset painted the hills copper and gold. A meadowlark called from somewhere near the fence line. Wyatt stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He offered one. She accepted. The tin cup felt warm against her palms. You don't have to tell me anything, Wyatt said. Hannah stared toward the horizon. I thought he was gone forever. Wyatt waited. After a while, she continued. He promised we'd marry before the baby came. The wind moved through the tall grass below the hill. I believed him. She laughed once. A small sound without humor. That was my mistake. Wyatt looked down at his coffee. No. Hannah glanced at him. He met her eyes. Trusting someone isn't a mistake. Neither spoke after that. But somehow the silence felt lighter. 3 days later, Curtis Hale rode into Cedar Run Ranch. He arrived just before supper. Clean coat, polished boots, a confident smile that looked practiced. Hannah recognized him immediately. Time had changed very little. The same dark hair, the same easy charm, the same face she had once trusted. Curtis removed his hat. Hannah. She stood in the yard without moving. Wyatt emerged from the barn. Ben stopped hammering at a fence post nearby. Nobody looked comfortable. Curtis smiled as though they were old friends. "I've been looking for you." Hannah folded her arms. "You found me." For a moment, Curtis seemed disappointed by how calm she sounded. Then his attention shifted toward the ranch house, toward the land, toward the cattle. His eyes lingered there a second too long. Wyatt noticed, so did Hannah. Curtis cleared his throat. "I came to make things right." No one answered. The breeze tugged at the brim of his hat. Finally he said it. "The child is mine." The words hung in the air. Ben muttered something under his breath and walked away. Wyatt remained still. Hannah stared directly at Curtis. For years she had imagined this moment. Angry speeches, tears, questions. None of them came. Instead, she simply asked, "Why now?" Curtis hesitated, only briefly. But it was enough. Hannah saw it. The answer wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was calculation. "I have rights," Curtis said. The words sounded colder than he intended. Something hardened in Hannah's expression. The old hurt was still there, but it no longer owned her. "You gave up those rights when you left." Curtis glanced toward Wyatt. "I can provide for my family." Wyatt finally spoke. His voice remained calm. "Then why didn't you?" Curtis's jaw tightened. For the first time, his confidence slipped. The two men looked at one another across the yard. No threats, no raised voices. Just truth standing beside a lie. Curtis broke eye contact first. He climbed back into the saddle. "This isn't over." Then he rode away. Dust followed him down the road. That night Hannah couldn't sleep. The house was quiet. Moonlight stretched across the floorboards. Near midnight, she stepped downstairs for water. As she passed the kitchen window, voices drifted through the darkness outside. She froze. Two men stood near the barn. One voice belonged to Curtis. The other belonged to Vernon Pike. The banker's silver-tipped cane glinted beneath the moonlight. Hannah moved closer to the window. Curtis sounded nervous. Vernon sounded impatient. Then Hannah heard the words that turned her blood cold. "Once the baby is born," Vernon said quietly, "everything becomes easier." Neither man knew she was listening, and neither knew that from that moment forward, Hannah stopped believing any of this was only about her. She remained by the window until the voices faded into the darkness. The moon hung over the valley. A coyote called somewhere beyond the creek. Inside the house, every board seemed to creak louder than usual. Hannah barely slept. By dawn, she had decided one thing. She would tell Wyatt everything. But morning arrived carrying trouble of its own. Ben Turner came racing into the yard before breakfast. His horse was lathered with sweat. "Wyatt!" The shout brought everyone outside. Wyatt stepped from the barn. "What happened?" Ben removed his hat. "The east pasture." An hour later, they were there. Several cattle stood apart from the herd. Weak, unsteady. A few had collapsed near the watering trough. Wyatt knelt beside one of them. His jaw tightened. Someone had poured something into the water barrel. Not enough to kill quickly. Just enough to ruin livestock and cripple a ranch. The news spread through Silver Butte before sunset. By evening, another disaster followed. Smoke rose from the southern edge of Cedar Run. A storage barn near the hay shed caught fire. The ranch hands managed to contain it before the flames spread farther, but half the stored feed was lost. People began talking. Some said Wyatt was desperate. Others claimed he was staging damage to avoid paying debts. The rumors moved faster than the truth. 2 days later, Sheriff Nolan Briggs arrived. He removed his hat on the porch. His face looked older than usual. "There are witnesses." Wyatt leaned against a post. "Witnesses to what?" "They say they saw one of your men near the pasture before the cattle got sick." Silence followed. Nolan did not look convinced. Neither did Wyatt. But rumors had become evidence in the minds of many townspeople. After the sheriff left, Hannah found Wyatt repairing a broken gate hinge. The afternoon wind pushed through the grass around them. "You don't believe any of this?" It wasn't a question. Wyatt kept working. "No." The hammer struck metal. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he looked at her. "What worries me is someone wants other people to believe it." That night, Hannah finally told him about Vernon and Curtis. Every word. The conversation outside. The strange warning. The way Vernon seemed more interested in the baby than in her. Wyatt listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stared toward the dark pasture. The lantern beside them flickered. "I think you're right." Hannah frowned. "About what?" This was never about reputation. His eyes settled on the ranch house, then the land beyond it. The hills, the creek, the grazing fields. "It's about Cedar Run." The pieces began fitting together, too neatly, too deliberately. The next afternoon, Hannah visited the bank under the excuse of reviewing old loan records. Vernon Pike greeted her with a polished smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. While he spoke with another customer, Hannah noticed a storage room door standing partly open. Inside sat rows of ledgers, stacks of account books, years of records. Something told her to look. Late that evening, she returned. The bank was dark. Only moonlight spilled across the rear alley. She slipped inside through a side door left unsecured by a careless clerk. Her heart pounded, not from fear, from certainty. She found ledgers stretching back nearly a decade. Names, ranches, loans, payments, transfers. Then she saw it. Several ranches that had lost their land. Everyone connected to Vernon Pike. Everyone carrying the same altered figures, the same inflated debts, the same signatures copied across multiple pages. Cedar Run appeared near the bottom, the newest target. Hannah grabbed several account books and hurried out. But someone saw her. A voice shouted behind her. Boots struck the boardwalk. She ran. The night exploded with rain. Thunder rolled across the valley. She reached her horse and rode hard toward Cedar Run. Behind her, another rider followed. The storm swallowed the road. Lightning flashed across the red hills. The trail vanished beneath mud and darkness. Then pain hit. Sharp. Sudden. She gasped. One hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Another pain followed. Stronger. The horse stumbled through a wash crossing. Rain poured from the sky. Hannah fought to stay in the saddle. Ahead stood an abandoned cabin she vaguely remembered from an old cattle trail. She guided the horse toward it. Inside, wind rattled loose boards. Rain hammered the roof. Another pain bent her nearly double. Far away, hoofbeats echoed through the storm. Then a voice. "Hannah!" "Wyatt!" She had never been so relieved to hear a voice in her life. Moments later, the door burst open. Rainwater streamed from Wyatt's coat. His eyes found her immediately. The fear in them lasted only a second before relief replaced it. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "Hannah." She could barely answer. He knelt beside her. His hands were steady. His voice was steady. Only his eyes betrayed him. Then, while searching for blankets and dry supplies inside the cabin, Wyatt pulled loose an old wooden crate hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside lay several account books wrapped in oilcloth. The name on every ledger was the same: Vernon Pike. Years of records, years of proof, enough to destroy everything Vernon had built. Thunder shook the cabin. Rain beat against the walls. Hannah gripped Wyatt's hand as another contraction came. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something else finally broke free. Wyatt looked at her, not as someone he had rescued, not as someone he had protected, as the woman he loved. His voice dropped low, almost lost beneath the rain. I stopped protecting you because it was right. He tightened his hand around hers. I stayed because I love you. For a moment, the storm disappeared. Only the two of them remained. Then another wave of pain came, and somewhere beyond the thunder, the first cry of a newborn child rose into the Wyoming night. For a moment, nobody moved. The storm still battered the cabin walls. Rain ran down the small window in crooked streams. Wind rattled the loose boards overhead. Then Martha Quinn smiled. The old midwife wrapped the baby carefully in a clean blanket and placed him into Hannah's arms. There you are, little one, she whispered. The tiny boy squirmed once and settled. Hannah stared down at him. His eyes were closed. His fist rested against his cheek. Everything else disappeared. The storm, the fear, the months of uncertainty. All of it drifted somewhere far away. Wyatt stood beside the bed, silent. His shirt was soaked from the ride through the rain. Mud stained his boots. A cut on one hand had dried unnoticed hours earlier. Yet he couldn't look away from the child. Martha noticed. So, she said softly, are you planning to stand there all night? A faint laugh escaped Hannah. The first in days. Wyatt stepped closer, carefully, almost cautiously, as though approaching something precious. The baby yawned. Wyatt's expression changed. Hannah had seen him face angry ranchers, debt collectors, drought, and storms. She had never seen him look like this. Would you like to hold him? She asked. Wyatt blinked, then nodded. Very slowly. Martha placed the baby into his arms. The room fell quiet. The child seemed impossibly small against Wyatt's broad chest. Wyatt looked down. Something softened deep behind his eyes, the kind of thing words rarely reach. Outside, thunder rolled away toward the mountains. By dawn, the storm had passed. 3 days later, they returned to Cedar Run Ranch. News traveled quickly across Silver Butte. The baby was healthy. Hannah was recovering. And Sheriff Nolan Briggs had begun examining the ledgers found inside the cabin. The investigation moved faster than Vernon Pike expected. Every book matched the others, every forged debt, every altered account, every ranch taken through deception. One afternoon, Nolan arrived carrying a leather satchel filled with papers. Ben Turner followed close behind. You need to see this, the sheriff said. The kitchen table disappeared beneath documents. Receipts, loan agreements, transfer records, pages yellowed with age. Ben placed one final paper on top. His face looked grim. I found the witness. The room grew still. A former bank clerk from Casper had come forward. The man recognized Vernon Pike's handwriting. More importantly, he knew why Curtis Hale had disappeared. Days later, the entire town crowded into the meeting hall beside the church. Every bench was filled. People stood along the walls. The same town that once whispered about Hannah now waited in complete silence. Vernon Pike sat near the front. His cane rested across his knees. For the first time since Hannah had known him, he looked uncertain. Sheriff Briggs presented the evidence one piece at a time. The ledgers, the forged accounts, the stolen properties. Then came Curtis Hale. He looked older now, smaller somehow. The confidence he once carried had vanished. The sheriff asked one question. Why did you leave Hannah Price? Curtis stared at the floor. long enough that everyone already knew the answer would hurt. Finally, he spoke. Because Vernon paid me. A murmur swept through the room. Curtis swallowed hard. He found out Hannah had rights to a small inherited parcel of land. If we married, she would have kept it. Vernon wanted control of everything tied to the neighboring properties. Hannah sat perfectly still. Beside her, Wyatt's jaw tightened. Not from jealousy, from anger over how casually another person's future had been treated. By the end of the hearing, Vernon Pike's empire had collapsed. The bank would be audited. The fraudulent claims were void. Cedar Run Ranch belonged to Wyatt free and clear, yet the moment people remembered longest came afterward. Not during the evidence, not during the confession. After. Wyatt rose from his seat. The baby rested peacefully in his arms. The hall grew quiet. Even the floorboards seemed to stop creaking. Wyatt looked around the room, at the townspeople, at the sheriff, at Hannah. Then he spoke. This boy doesn't need a father by blood. His voice carried through every corner of the hall. He needs a father who stays. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Wyatt turned toward Hannah. The child slept against his shoulder. Hannah Price. Her breath caught. A smile touched the corner of Wyatt's mouth. Small, nervous, entirely genuine. I've spent months finding reasons to protect you. A few people lowered their eyes. I don't need reasons anymore. The room held its breath. I love you. Hannah's eyes filled before she could stop them. Wyatt continued. I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving that wasn't just something said during a storm. Soft laughter moved through the crowd. Then came silence again. Hannah, will you marry me? For a second she couldn't speak. The same church bell outside that had once marked one of the hardest days of her life began ringing the hour. The sound drifted through the open windows. She looked at Wyatt, at the baby, at the future standing in front of her. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, I will. Applause erupted. But Wyatt wasn't finished. Sheriff Briggs handed him a folded document. Wyatt signed it, then passed it back. The sheriff nodded. It's official. A few people looked confused. Nolan smiled. Wyatt Cole has legally recognized the child as his son. The room fell silent once more. A different silence. A meaningful one. No one could challenge it now. No one could take the boy away. Wyatt leaned down and kissed Hannah's forehead. Simple. Gentle. Certain. 1 year later, Cedar Run Ranch looked different. The vegetable garden behind the house flourished. Fresh paint covered the porch rails. Children often gathered near the community kitchen Hannah opened beside the bunkhouse. The laughter carried across the valley on warm afternoons. A new porch overlooked the Wyoming hills. Wyatt built it himself. Most evenings, he sat there with Hannah while their son chased grasshoppers through the yard. One autumn evening, the sky burned orange behind the mountains. The little boy sat on Wyatt's shoulders. Hannah stood beside the porch railing. The wind moved softly through the cottonwoods. No whispers followed her anymore. No judgment, no shame. Only the sounds of home. Wyatt reached for her hand. She took it, and together they watched the sun disappear beyond the Wyoming horizon. A family created not by circumstance, not by obligation, but by choice. And sometimes, those are the families that last the longest. As the sun settles behind the Wyoming hills and the last light fades across Cedar Run Ranch, it's worth pausing for a moment and asking yourself something. What would you have done if you were Hannah? If the town had already decided who you were before hearing your story? If the future you planned disappeared overnight? If the person who promised to stay was the first one to leave? And what if, when you had every reason to stop trusting people, someone quietly chose to stand beside you anyway? Maybe that's what makes this story linger. Not the storm, not the courtroom, not even the secrets that finally came to light. It's the reminder that healing often arrives in ordinary ways. A seat saved at a table, a light left on in a window, a hand that stays when life becomes difficult. Wyatt didn't change Hannah's past. He couldn't. But he gave her something just as valuable, a future she no longer had to face alone. And perhaps that's what love really is. Not rescuing someone from every hardship, but walking beside them long enough that they remember they don't have to carry it all by themselves. If this story touched you, tell us in the comments which moment stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy stories about courage, second chances, enduring love, and the quiet ways people help one another heal, we hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting beyond the next trail, and we'd be honored to share them with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people who choose to stay.